May 5, 1945. The Third Reich is dying. In bunkers across a shattered Germany, officers burn documents. Soldiers shed their uniforms. The 1,000-year empire that was promised has lasted 12 years, and now, in its final hours, it's tearing itself apart from within. But in the mountains of Austria, in a medieval castle perched above the clouds, something impossible is about to happen. Something that will defy everything we think we know about World War II. American soldiers will stand shoulder to shoulder with German Wehrmacht troops. French WWII imprisoned by the Nazis will take up arms alongside their former captors. And together, they'll face down a fanatical SS force determined to kill them all before the war can end. This is the story of the battle for Castle Itter, the strangest battle of the Second World War. And it almost didn't make it into the history books at all. To understand how we got here, to this impossible moment, we need to go back, not far, just a few days. But in May 1945, a few days might as well be a lifetime. Berlin has fallen. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler put a gun in his mouth in his underground bunker as Soviet shells rained down on the Reich Chancellery above. His body was burned in a shell crater. The man who promised to reshape the world ended as ash and bone in a hole in the ground. But the war isn't over yet. See, Hitler's death didn't flip a switch. It didn't make the fighting stop. In some ways, it made things worse, because now there's no center, no authority. The Nazi Empire is fragmenting into 1,000 pieces, and each piece is making its own desperate choices. Some German soldiers are surrendering as fast as they can, especially to the Americans and British. They know what's waiting for them if the Soviets catch them. They've seen what the Wehrmacht did in Russia. They know the Red Army is coming for payback. But others? Others are digging in. The true believers, the fanatics. The SS troops who know they're guilty of atrocities that will never be forgiven. They're fighting on because surrender means a noose or a firing squad. And then there's a third group, the ones caught in between, the regular Wehrmacht soldiers who just want to survive the next 48 hours, who can see the writing on the wall and are trying to figure out how to get to tomorrow without dying for a regime that's already dead. This is the chaos. This is the fog. This is the world coming apart at the seams. And in this world, in these final days, the impossible becomes possible. High in the Austrian Alps, there's a castle. Castle Itter. It's not one of those massive, sprawling fortresses you see in the movies. It's smaller, more intimate. Built in the 13th century, perched on a hill overlooking the village of Itter, with the snow-capped mountains rising behind it like something out of a fairy tale. But in 1945, Castle Itter is no fairy tale. It's a prison. Specifically, it's one of the Prominenten camps, special prisons where the Nazis kept high-value prisoners. Not Jews being sent to extermination camps, not resistance fighters being tortured for information. These were VIPs, former prime ministers, generals, tennis champions, people with names that still carried weight. The Nazis kept them alive as potential bargaining chips, leverage for some future negotiation that never came. Inside Castle Itter, there are about 14 prisoners as spring turns to early May. They're an eclectic group, to put it mildly. There's Paul Reynaud, former Prime Minister of France, the man who was leading the country when it fell in 1940. He's 66 years old now, weathered by years of captivity, but still sharp, still political. There's Édouard Daladier, another former French Prime Minister, Reynaud's predecessor and rival. These two men despised each other in the outside world. In here, they've had to make peace. Sort of. There's General Maurice Gamelin, the French military commander who failed to stop the German blitzkrieg in 1940. He's lived with that shame for 5 years now. There's Jean Borotra, one of the famous Four Musketeers of French tennis. In the 1920s, he was one of the most celebrated athletes in the world. Now he's 46, still fit, still defiant. Marie-Agnès Caillot, Charles de Gaulle's older sister. Yes, that de Gaulle, the leader of Free France. The Nazis kept her here, hoping she'd be useful. She's been anything but cooperative, and there are others. Military officers, aristocrats, a labor leader, a collection of people who, under normal circumstances, would never have been in the same room together. But these aren't normal circumstances. For months they've been trapped here in this Alpine prison, guarded by SS troops, waiting, wondering if they'll see liberation or if the SS will execute them when the end comes. They've heard the rumors. They know what happened at other camps as the Allies approached. Mass executions, prisoners shot in their cells to prevent them from testifying about what they saw. They're living on borrowed time, and they know it. But then something changes. In late April, the guards start to get nervous. You can see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. The confident brutality of the SS is cracking. They're listening to the radio in secret. They can hear the artillery getting closer. And on May 3rd, something remarkable happens. The SS guards leave. Just leave? They abandon the castle in the middle of the night. No orders, no farewell. They just pack up and disappear into the darkness, running from the approaching Americans, running from the judgment they know is coming. The prisoners wake up on the morning of May 4th to find themselves alone, unguarded, free, sort of. Because here's the problem. They might be unguarded, but they're not safe, not even close. Castle Itter is in the middle of the Austrian Alps. The nearest American forces are somewhere, maybe 20 miles away, maybe more. The roads are uncertain. The forest is full of SS stragglers who'd gladly shoot a group of French VIPs for sport. And there's another problem, a bigger one. There's a Waffen SS unit in the area. Combat troops, hardened soldiers who haven't gotten the memo that the war is over. Or if they have, they don't care. They're still armed, still organized, still dangerous. And someone has decided that these prisoners, these witnesses to Nazi crimes, cannot be allowed to survive. The prisoners know they need help. They need protection. They need armed soldiers who can hold this castle until the Americans arrive. But where are they going to find that? The answer to that question is going to lead to one of the most bizarre alliances of the war. His name is Andreas Krobot. He's not one of the prisoners. He's a Czech resistance fighter who's been working as a forced laborer in the area. But with the SS guards gone, he's seen an opportunity. On the morning of May 4th, Krobot does something incredibly brave and incredibly risky. He leaves the castle and heads out into the countryside looking for help. Any help. Think about what he's doing here. The war is still on. There are trigger-happy soldiers of multiple armies roaming these mountains. Any one of them could shoot him on sight. He has no uniform, no papers that would mean anything. He's just a man on a mission trying to save a castle full of people he barely knows. And somehow, through a combination of luck, courage, and sheer determination, he makes it to the nearby town of Würgl, where he finds something he wasn't expecting: Germans who want to help. His name is Josef Gangl, Major Josef Gangl of the Wehrmacht, and he's about to make a choice that will define his entire life. Gangl is 44 years old. He's been a soldier for most of his adult life, not SS, Wehrmacht. There's a difference, though history often blurs it. The Wehrmacht was the regular German army. Complicit in Nazi crimes? Absolutely. Many units participated in atrocities. But soldiers like Gangl, career military men, saw themselves as serving Germany, not the Nazi Party. By May 1945, Gangl has had enough. He can see what the SS is doing. He can see the fanaticism, the pointless violence, the determination to drag Germany down into hell with them. And he's made a decision. He's joined the Austrian resistance. Yes, a German major, in the resistance. This is the moral chaos of the war's final days. Traditional loyalties have shattered. It's not about flags anymore. It's about survival, about basic human decency, about choosing which side of history you want to die on. When Krobot finds Gangl in Würgl and explains the situation, that there are high-value French prisoners trapped in Castle Itter and that an SS unit is preparing to attack, Gangl doesn't hesitate. He's in. But he's also realistic. He has maybe a dozen Wehrmacht soldiers with him. Good men, brave men. But a dozen rifles aren't going to hold off a determined SS assault. He needs more help. He needs the Americans. Gangl gets in a vehicle with Krobot and a few of his men, and they drive west, toward the American lines. It's insane. They're German soldiers in German uniforms driving toward the U.S. Army. They could be shot on sight, they could be captured, and spend the rest of their lives in a POW camp. But they go anyway. Because sometimes in the chaos of history's darkest moments, people surprise you. Captain John C. Jack Lee, Jr. of the U.S. Army's 12th Armored Division is having a strange week. The war in Europe is clearly ending. Everyone can feel it. The Germans are surrendering in droves. There's a bizarre, almost surreal quality to these final days. Soldiers who were trying to kill each other last week are now smoking cigarettes together and trading stories. Lee is 27 years old, young for a captain, but he's earned his rank through combat. He's smart, aggressive, and adaptable, qualities that are about to be tested in ways he never imagined. On May 4th, Lee and his unit have been tasked with liberating a labor camp near Kufstein. It's grim work. The prisoners are emaciated, traumatized. Liberation isn't always joyful. Sometimes it's just the beginning of learning how to live again, and that's when the Germans show up. Imagine Lee's perspective. He's an American captain in enemy territory, surrounded by his men, and suddenly there's a vehicle approaching with Wehrmacht soldiers inside. His hand probably goes to his sidearm. His men raise their rifles. This could go very wrong, very fast. But then Gangl steps out, hands visible, no threatening moves, and through a translator, because Gangl's English isn't great and Lee's German is worse, he explains the situation. There's a castle, French prisoners, SS about to attack. We need help. Lee listens. And here's where you have to appreciate the absurdity of the moment. By every rule of warfare, every regulation, every protocol, Lee should arrest these Germans and send them to a POW camp. He's got orders. He's got a chain of command. But sometimes the right thing to do isn't in the manual. Lee makes a decision. He's going to help. Not because it's ordered, not because it's safe, but because it's the right thing to do. He gathers his available men, about 15 of them, and whatever vehicles he can spare. A couple of jeeps, a tank destroyer, not a full company, not overwhelming force, just what he can scrape together without abandoning his other positions. And on the afternoon of May 4th, Captain Jack Lee, Jr. and Major Josef Gangl, American and German, enemies on paper, drive together toward Castle Itter, an alliance that shouldn't exist, to fight a battle that shouldn't be necessary. But first, they have to survive the journey. The drive to Castle Itter is tense. They're moving through uncertain territory. The front lines are fluid, meaningless. There are German units that have surrendered, German units that are retreating, and German units that are still fighting. There are American patrols, Austrian civilians trying to figure out which army they should be cheering for, and SS stragglers who'd happily ambush a small convoy. Lee's men are nervous. You can imagine the conversations in those jeeps. The sidelong glances at the German soldiers riding with them. The hands that stay a little too close to weapons. These men were trying to kill each other a week ago. Now they're riding together. Trust is a luxury they can't quite afford yet. But Gangl is proving himself. He knows the terrain. He knows where the danger spots are. He warns Lee about potential ambush points. He's not just a passenger. He's a partner. And slowly, grudgingly, Lee's men start to accept it. They reach Itter without incident, though the journey takes hours on the winding mountain roads. It's late afternoon by the time the castle comes into view, a small fortress on a hill, stone walls, a gatehouse, surrounded by forest. It looks defensible, but only barely. Lee's thinking like a soldier now. He's assessing fields of fire, approach routes, weak points. This isn't going to be easy. They pull up to the castle, and the French prisoners come out to meet them. Imagine this scene. Imagine what's going through everyone's minds. The French prisoners see American soldiers, liberation at last, but also German Wehrmacht troops, the same uniforms that occupied their country, the same army that destroyed their nation in 1940. Some of these prisoners have been captive for years because of men wearing those uniforms. The tension is thick enough to cut. Paul Renault steps forward. He's the de facto leader of the prisoners, and he's a politician through and through. He understands complexity. He understands necessity. Gangl explains, through translation, what's happening, that he's with the resistance, that the SS is coming, that they need to work together to survive the night. Reynaud listens, looks at Lee, looks at Gangl, looks at his fellow prisoners, and then he nods. What choice do they have? Lee and Gangl start fortifying the castle. They don't have much time, maybe a few hours before the SS arrives, maybe less. The castle is old, medieval. It wasn't designed for modern warfare. The walls are thick stone, which is good, but the windows are large, which is bad. There are too many approaches, too many angles to defend, and they're outnumbered, badly. Lee has about 15 American soldiers. Gangl has about a dozen Wehrmacht troops. There are maybe 10 of the French prisoners who are fit enough to fight. Borotra, Reynaud, some of the military officers. They're not soldiers anymore, but they can hold a rifle, so that's roughly 40 defenders, against an SS force that intelligence suggests is at least 100 men. Maybe more. Waffen-SS, combat veterans who've been fighting for years. Fanatics who believe they're defending the fatherland against betrayal and corruption. Men who have nothing to lose. The math isn't good. They barricade the windows, move furniture to create firing positions, set up the tank destroyer, a M4 Sherman called Besotten Jenny, to cover the main approach, distribute ammunition. The French prisoners help. They're carrying furniture, filling sandbags, doing whatever they can. These men and women who've been helpless for so long are finally able to fight back. Marie-Agnès Caillot, de Gaulle's sister, refuses to hide in the keep. She insists on staying with the men, helping with medical supplies. Jean Borotra, the tennis champion, is almost giddy with energy. He's been trapped for so long. Now there's action, purpose. He takes a rifle like he's picking up a tennis racket. The sun is setting over the Alps. Long shadows stretch across the valley. It's beautiful, peaceful. In a few hours, this place is going to become hell. In the keep of the castle, Lee and Gangl stand together, looking at a map, planning. These two men who should be enemies are now working in perfect coordination. Lee asks through the translator, "How many SS do you think?" Gangl considers, 100, maybe 150. They have machine guns, Panzerfausts. Lee nods. Not good, but not impossible. "We hold until relief arrives," Lee says. "I got word to division. They're sending help. We just have to last through the night." Gangl smiles grimly. "Then we last through the night." They shake hands, American and German, allies in the strangest way. Outside, the light fades. The mountains turn purple, then black. The stars come out, brilliant and cold, and then they hear it. The SS is coming. May 5th, 1945, sometime around 4 a.m. The attack begins not with a bang, but with probing fire. A few shots from the tree line, testing the defenses, seeing where the defenders are positioned. Lee's men don't return fire. Not yet. No point wasting ammunition. Let the SS reveal themselves first. Gangl is at a window on the second floor, watching. He knows how the SS operates. He's fought alongside them, against them. He knows they're brave and vicious and very, very good at what they do. "They're setting up machine guns," he says to Lee. "There." And there, pointing to positions in the trees. Lee nods. He's already seen them. "When the sun comes up, they'll hit us hard." Full assault, and that's exactly what happens. As dawn breaks, pale gold light spilling over the mountains, the SS opens up with everything they have. Machine gun fire tears through the castle windows. Bullets spark off stone. Panzerfausts, German anti-tank rockets, slam into the walls, exploding in showers of rock and dust. The defenders return fire, Americans and Germans, side by side, shooting at the SS troops advancing through the forest. It's chaos. The noise is overwhelming. The smell of cordite and smoke fills the castle. People are shouting in 3 languages, English, German, French. The tank destroyer, Besotten Jenny, fires its main gun. The boom is enormous in the confined space of the castle courtyard. The shell hits an SS machine gun position and detonates in a burst of dirt and splintered wood. The SS keep coming. They're using the forest for cover, advancing in short rushes. They're good, disciplined. They know if they can get close enough to breach the castle walls, it's over. They'll overrun the defenders through sheer numbers. Lee is everywhere, moving from position to position, encouraging his men. Make your shots count. Don't waste ammo. Gangl is calm under fire. He's been in worse. He directs his Wehrmacht soldiers with precision. Wait for them to commit, then hit the flanks. The French prisoners are fighting too. Renault is loading magazines, passing ammunition. Borotra is at a window with a rifle, firing with remarkable accuracy. For a man who hasn't held a weapon in years, he's deadly. General Gamelin, the man blamed for France's defeat in 1940, is getting his redemption. He's coordinating fields of fire like he's back in command. Cover that approach! They're trying to flank us on the left. For hours they hold. The SS keeps attacking, wave after wave. They're taking casualties, but they don't care. They're trying to overwhelm the defenders through sheer persistence. Ammunition is running low. The defenders are rationing shots now, making every bullet count. And then, mid-morning, disaster strikes. A Panzerfaust hits Besotten Jenny, the tank destroyer. The crew bails out, but the vehicle is done. Smoke pours from the engine. The main gun is useless. They've lost their heaviest weapon. Lee's face goes grim. Without that gun, they can't hold off another major assault. The SS will sense the weakness and push hard, and that's exactly what they do. The SS launches their biggest attack yet. They come from multiple directions, firing and moving, covering each other. They're trying to breach the main gate. This is it. This is the moment that could break them. The defenders pour fire into the advancing SS, Americans and Germans and French all fighting together. The noise is deafening. The castle is filling with smoke. Lee is at the gate with a Thompson submachine gun, firing in controlled bursts. Next to him is a Wehrmacht soldier, firing a MP-40. They're shoulder to shoulder, covering each other. The SS are at the gate. They're trying to plant charges to blow it open. Gangl sees what's happening. He knows if that gate falls, everyone inside is dead. He makes a decision. Josef Gangl steps into the open, into the line of fire, to get a better shot at the SS troops at the gate. He takes down 2 of them. Precise shots. Professional, and then an SS sniper's bullet catches him in the head. Major Josef Gangl dies instantly. The German major who chose to be a hero instead of a war criminal. The man who bridged the impossible gap between enemies. He's gone, but his sacrifice works. The SS troops at the gate are forced to fall back. The charges aren't planted. The gate holds. Inside the castle, they pull Gangl's body back. Lee looks down at the German officer he barely knew but had come to respect. There's no time for mourning. Not yet. But the loss is felt by everyone. The Americans fight harder. The Wehrmacht soldiers fight with fury. They're going to hold this castle for Gangl. They're going to make his death mean something. It's approaching noon on May 5th. The battle has been raging for 8 hours. The defenders are exhausted, low on ammunition, running on adrenaline and determination. The SS has pulled back, regrouping for what everyone knows will be the final assault. This next attack will either succeed or break them. Inside the castle, Lee is doing a head count. They've taken casualties, several wounded, 1 dead, besides Gangl. The French prisoners are helping with the wounded. They've turned a room in the keep into a makeshift aid station. Everyone knows they can't hold off another major attack. The ammunition is almost gone. People are down to their last magazines. Lee looks at the faces around him. Americans who've been fighting for months. Germans who betrayed their own army to do the right thing. French prisoners who found their courage again. Help is coming, he says. Division knows where we are. We just have to hold a little longer. It's the only hope they have. Outside, the SS is massing for the final push. They can hear them in the forest, the sound of equipment moving, officers shouting orders. This is it. And then someone has an idea. Jean Borotra, the tennis champion, steps forward. He's been thinking. There's an American unit in the next valley. Not far, maybe 5 miles. If someone could get through the SS lines and reach them, everyone looks at him like he's crazy. Get through the SS lines? On foot? It's suicide. Borotra smiles. I was a runner before I played tennis. I can do this? Lee starts to object, but Renault cuts him off. He's right. It's the only chance. Lee looks at Borotra. The Frenchman is 46 years old. He's been a prisoner for years. But there's something in his eyes, a determination, a fire. You sure about this? Lee asks. Borotra nods. Just tell me which way to run. They plan it quickly. They'll create a diversion, concentrated fire on the SS positions to the east. Borotra will go out through a small gate on the west side and head north through the forest. It's a long shot, but it's all they have. They wait for the right moment. The SS is preparing their assault, distracted. Lee gives the signal. Every defender opens fire at once. A storm of bullets tears into the SS positions. The SS returns fire, thinking the defenders are making a last desperate sortie. And in the chaos, Jean Borotra slips out the west gate and runs. He runs like his life depends on it. Because it does. Not just his life, the lives of everyone in that castle. He runs through the forest, dodging trees, leaping over roots. He can hear gunfire behind him. He doesn't know if anyone saw him. If there are SS troops pursuing, he just runs. For 20 minutes, he runs. His lungs are burning. His legs are screaming. But he's Jean Borotra. He was one of the greatest athletes in the world. His body remembers. And then he sees them. American soldiers. A relief column moving up the valley. He bursts out of the forest, shouting, waving his arms, "American! American! Castle Itter! They need help!" The Americans nearly shoot him, but an officer recognizes his French accent, orders his men to hold fire. Borotra gasps out the situation. The castle, the battle. They're nearly out of ammunition. They need help now. The American officer doesn't hesitate. Mount up! Double time! The relief column races toward Castle Itter. Back at the castle, they don't know if Borotra made it. They can only hope. The SS final assault is beginning. The defenders can see them massing at the tree line. There are so many. Too many. Lee checks his Thompson. 1 magazine left. The Wehrmacht soldiers are checking their ammunition. Almost nothing. The French prisoners are ready to fight hand to hand if it comes to that. They're not going back into captivity. They'd rather die free. The SS starts forward. A slow, methodical advance. Machine guns covering, infantry moving in coordinated rushes. The defenders open fire. Every shot has to count now. The SS is getting closer. 50 yards, 40. This is it. This is the end. And then? American tanks crash through the forest on the road below the castle. Heavy machine guns open up on the SS positions. The relief column has arrived. The SS assault collapses. They're caught between the castle defenders and the American armor, caught in a crossfire. They break. The SS soldiers, these fanatical troops who've been attacking all day, turn and run into the forest. Some try to surrender. Others just disappear into the trees. It's over. The battle for Castle Itter has lasted roughly 12 hours. The strangest battle of World War II ends with an American-German-French victory over the SS. The prisoners are safe. The defenders have held, and Jean Borotra, exhausted and grinning, comes back up the road with the American column. He's done the impossible. Again. In the hours after the battle, there's a strange quiet in Castle Itter. The American relief force secures the area. They round up the SS prisoners. Medical personnel tend to the wounded. Captain Jack Lee stands in the courtyard looking at the damage. Bullet holes, blast craters, the wreckage of Besotten Jenny. And in the keep, covered with a blanket, the body of Major Josef Gangl. The French prisoners are finally, truly free. They'll go home soon, back to France, back to their families, back to a world that's been waiting for them. But they'll never forget this place, this impossible day. Years later, Paul Reynaud will say that the defense of Castle Itter was when he truly understood that not all Germans were Nazis, that there were men like Gangl who chose humanity over ideology. Edouard Daladier will write about it in his memoirs, the surreal experience of fighting alongside German soldiers against other Germans. Jean Borotra will describe his desperate run through the forest as the most important race of his life, more important than any tennis championship. But what about the soldiers? Captain Jack Lee will be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions at Castle Itter. His men will receive commendations. They'll go home as heroes. The Wehrmacht soldiers who fought alongside them, their fate is more complicated. They're still technically enemy combatants. Some will end up in POW camps anyway, despite their heroism. The bureaucracy of war doesn't have a category for German soldiers who saved French prisoners from the SS, but they'll be treated well, and eventually they'll go home too. As for Josef Gangl, the man whose choice to fight against his own army's SS troops made the entire defense possible, he'll be buried in Wörgl with full honors. The Austrian resistance will remember him. The town will remember him. In 2005, 60 years after the battle, the people of Wörgl will name a street after him. Ganglplatz, a small memorial, a way to say, we remember. We remember that when it mattered most, you chose the right side. So what do we make of this story? The battle for Castle Itter lasted one day. It involved maybe 160 people total. It changed the course of exactly nothing in the grand scheme of World War II. The war ended 3 days later. With or without this battle, Hitler was dead, Germany was defeated, and the Nazis were finished. So why does it matter? Because it shows us something we need to remember about war, about people, about the choices we make when everything falls apart. See, we like our history simple. We like our World War II stories to have clear good guys and clear bad guys, Americans and British and Soviets on one side, Germans and Japanese on the other. Simple. But Castle Itter doesn't fit that narrative. Here you have American soldiers and German soldiers fighting together, not reluctantly, not at gunpoint, but as genuine allies, trusting each other, depending on each other. You have French prisoners, men who had every reason to hate every German in uniform, accepting help from Wehrmacht troops. You have a German major who could have surrendered to the Americans and spent the rest of the war in safety, choosing instead to fight against his own country's SS. And you have SS troops, Germans fighting Germans in the final days of the war. It's messy, complicated, human. Josef Gangl's choice is the heart of this story. He wasn't forced to help. He could have walked away. He could have stayed neutral. He'd survived the whole war. All he had to do was keep his head down for a few more days, and he would have made it out alive. But he didn't do that. He chose to act. He chose to protect strangers. He chose to fight against the regime he'd once served, and it cost him his life. There's something profoundly moving about that. The idea that even in the middle of the worst war in human history, even in a regime built on cruelty and obedience, individual people could still choose differently, could still choose to be better. That's what Castle Itter represents. Not a turning point in the war, not a strategic victory, but a reminder that human decency doesn't disappear, even when everything around it is falling apart. Jack Lee and Josef Gangl should have been enemies. They were enemies, on paper. But when they met, they recognized something in each other, a shared sense of duty, of honor, of basic human morality. And for one day, that was more important than the uniforms they wore. The French prisoners should have refused help from German soldiers. They'd been imprisoned by Germans. Their country had been destroyed by Germans. But they were pragmatic enough, wise enough, to accept help when it was offered. Because survival isn't about ideology. It's about recognizing allies wherever you find them. In 1945, Castle Itter was in Footnote, a weird little story that didn't fit anywhere in the official histories. It was too strange, too complicated. It confused the narrative. But that's exactly why it deserves to be remembered, because real history isn't simple. Real people aren't simple. War brings out the worst in humanity, yes. But sometimes it brings out the best too. It brings out people like Josef Gangl, who chose to protect prisoners rather than abandon them. People like Jack Lee, who chose to trust a former enemy because it was the right thing to do. People like Jean Borotra, who ran through enemy fire at 46 years old to save people he'd only known for days. People like the French prisoners who took up arms alongside their former captors because they understood that, in that moment, they were all just human beings trying to survive. There's a photograph from after the battle. It's grainy, black and white, fading now after 80 years. It shows American soldiers and French prisoners standing together in front of Castle Itter. Some are smiling, some look exhausted, some are just staring at the camera like they can't quite believe they're still alive. What the photograph doesn't show are the German soldiers who fought alongside them. They're not in the frame. Maybe they'd already been moved to a POW processing area. Maybe someone decided it was too complicated to explain. Maybe history just wasn't ready for that image yet. But they were there. That's what matters. They fought, they bled. Josef Gangl died. And for one day, in a castle in the Austrian Alps, the simple categories of us and them didn't apply. There were just people, trying to do the right thing, trying to survive, trying to make sure that when the war finally ended, they could look themselves in the mirror. We talk a lot about the good war, World War II as the last clear moral conflict, the last time America and the Allies were unambiguously on the right side. And in the largest sense, that's true. The Nazi regime was evil. The Holocaust was evil. The war to stop them was necessary and just. But Castle Itter reminds us that even in a just war, the reality on the ground is more complex than we want to admit. Not every German soldier was a Nazi. Many were. Many were complicit in atrocities. But some were just men caught up in something bigger than themselves. Men like Josef Gangl, who when given the chance to choose, chose differently. That doesn't excuse the Wehrmacht's crimes. It doesn't erase their participation in the Nazi war machine. But it does remind us that people are capable of change, of growth, of moral courage, even late in the game. History is written by the victors, they say, and that's mostly true. But sometimes, if we look carefully, we can find these little stories that don't fit the official narrative, these moments that complicate our understanding. Castle Itter is one of those moments. It asks uncomfortable questions. If Americans and Germans could fight together at Castle Itter, what does that say about all the other killing in the war? If Josef Gangl could be a hero in May 1945, what was he in 1944? 1943? 1942? There are no easy answers. History doesn't give us easy answers, but it gives us stories. Stories that make us think, that challenge us, that remind us that human beings are capable of both terrible evil and extraordinary good, sometimes in the same lifetime. The battle for Castle Itter lasted 12 hours. The war ended 3 days later. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. The prisoners went home. The American soldiers went home. The war was over, and a German major was buried in an Austrian village, honored by the people whose resistance movement he'd joined. Honored for choosing, at the end, to be something more than a soldier following orders. That's the real victory of Castle Itter. Not that they held the castle, not that they beat the SS, but that they proved, even in the darkest times, people can choose to be better. For decades, the battle for Castle Itter was barely known outside Austria. There were a few mentions in military histories, a footnote here and there, but it didn't get the attention it deserved. Why? Partly because it was overshadowed. May 5, 1945 was 3 days before the German surrender. The whole world was focused on Berlin, on the final Soviet assault, on the negotiations for German capitulation. A small battle in the Austrian Alps didn't register, but partly because it was too weird, too complicated. It didn't fit the narrative we wanted to tell about World War II. We wanted clear heroes and villains. We wanted Americans liberating grateful prisoners. We wanted evil Germans getting their comeuppance. We didn't want Americans and Germans fighting together. We didn't want moral complexity. We didn't want to think about Wehrmacht soldiers who might have been decent people caught in an indecent system. So Castle Itter got buried. Not intentionally. Just overlooked. Filed away in the strange but true category and forgotten. It wasn't until 2013 that an American historian named Stephen Harding wrote a full book about the battle. The Last Battle, it was called. And suddenly, this forgotten story started getting attention. People were fascinated. How had they never heard about this? How had this incredible story been sitting in the archives for 70 years? The book became a bestseller, documentaries were made, articles were written, the internet discovered Castle Itter, and the story spread. Because we need stories like this. Now more than ever, actually, we live in a time of division, of us versus them, of clear sides and no middle ground. Politics, culture, everything is tribalized. You're either with us or against us. And Castle Itter says, no, that's not how it has to be. Castle Itter says that enemies can become allies, that people can change sides, that the uniform someone wears doesn't determine their worth as a human being. It says that in the worst circumstances imaginable, literally in the middle of history's most destructive war, people found a way to cooperate, to trust each other, to work together for something bigger than their own grievances. If they could do that in May 1945, what's our excuse? I'm not saying it's easy. It wasn't easy for Jack Lee to trust Josef Gangl. It wasn't easy for the French prisoners to accept help from Wehrmacht soldiers. It wasn't easy for Gangl to turn against his own army. But they did it anyway. Because the alternative, letting hatred and tribal loyalty determine every choice, was worse. They chose to be human first and soldiers second. And that choice saved lives. Let's talk about what happened to them. The people who survived Castle Itter. Captain Jack Lee went home to America. He tried to put the war behind him. He'd seen enough combat for one lifetime. He worked, raised a family, lived a normal life. But he never forgot Castle Itter, never forgot Josef Gangl. In interviews years later, Lee would always mention the German major, would always make sure people knew that Gangl was the real hero of the story. Lee died in 1973. He was 55 years old. At his funeral, veterans from the 12th Armored Division remembered him as one of the best officers they'd ever served under. Brave, compassionate, willing to do the right thing even when it wasn't easy. Paul Renault, the former French Prime Minister, returned to France as a hero. He went back into politics, served in the government, wrote his memoirs. He lived until 1966, dying at age 88. In his writings, he always spoke warmly of the American and German soldiers who saved his life at Castle Itter. He used the story as an example of how even in war humanity could prevail. Edouard Daladier, his old rival, also returned to politics. The two men never quite got along, even after surviving a battle together. Some grudges run too deep. But they had a mutual respect. They'd been through something together that few others could understand. Daladier died in 1970. Jean Borotra, the tennis champion who ran through enemy fire, lived until 1994. He was 95 years old when he died. Almost made it to the new millennium. He gave interviews about Castle Itter over the years. Always with a smile, always emphasizing how ordinary it felt at the time. You just do what you have to do, he'd say. You don't think about being heroic. You just run. His run through the forest to summon help became legendary among French historians. Some called it the most important athletic achievement of his life, more important than any Grand Slam title. Borotra would laugh at that, but he never denied it either. Marie-Agnès Caillot, Charles de Gaulle's sister, returned to France and lived quietly. She'd spent enough time in the spotlight, thank you very much. She died in 1982 at age 81. General Maurice Gamelin, the man blamed for France's defeat in 1940, got a measure of redemption at Castle Itter. He'd proven he could still command under fire. He died in 1958, still controversial, still argued about, but with one clean, clear moment of heroism on his record. The Wehrmacht soldiers who fought at Castle Itter, their stories are harder to trace. Many were processed through POW camps and sent home. Some tried to rebuild their lives in the wreckage of post-war Germany. Some succeeded. Some didn't. But the ones who survived carried the story with them, told their children and grandchildren about the day they fought alongside Americans against the SS. Some were believed, some weren't. It was such a strange story, impossible to believe unless you'd been there. But it was true, every word of it. And Josef Gangl. Major Josef Gangl rests in Würgl. There's a street named after him, a memorial plaque. The town hasn't forgotten. In 2005, on the 60th anniversary of the battle, there was a ceremony. Survivors came. Jack Lee's family was represented. French veterans, American veterans. They stood in front of the memorial and remembered the German major who chose to fight for what was right instead of what was easy. A German major who died fighting the SS, who died protecting French prisoners, who died alongside American soldiers. A man who, in the final days of the war, reminded everyone that individuals still matter, that choices still matter, that even when everything around you is chaos and evil, you can still choose to be good. That's Josef Gangl's legacy. Not that he was a perfect man, not that he made every right choice throughout the war, but that when it mattered most, when he could have walked away, he didn't. He stood, he fought, he died, and because of him, everyone else in that castle lived. Castle Itter still stands. You can visit it if you go to Austria. It's in the Tyrol region, in the mountains, still perched on that hill overlooking the village of Itter. It's privately owned now, not a museum, not a tourist attraction, just a building with a remarkable history that most people walk past without knowing. There are some small plaques, some markers indicating what happened there in May 1945, but nothing big, nothing flashy. The castle itself has been repaired, the bullet holes have been patched, the blast damage fixed. It looks almost like it did before the war, medieval, peaceful, like something out of a fairy tale. Only the people who know the history can look at it and see the ghosts, can imagine American and German soldiers at the windows, can hear the gunfire, can feel the tension of that impossible day. In the village below, there's a small museum. It has some artifacts from the battle, photographs, documents, a few personal items from the soldiers who fought there. Local historians give talks sometimes. They tell the story to tourists and school children. They make sure the memory doesn't fade. Because stories like this need to be told, need to be remembered, not because they changed the outcome of the war, but because they changed how we understand the war. They remind us that history is made by individuals, by choices, by people deciding in crucial moments what kind of person they want to be. If you go to Castle Itter today, especially in the spring, it's beautiful. The mountains are green, the air is clear, wildflowers grow in the meadows. It's quiet, peaceful. It's hard to imagine it was ever anything else. But 80 years ago, for 12 hours, it was a battlefield, a place where impossible alliances were forged and where men from 3 different nations fought together against fanaticism and hate. And the castle remembers, even if most of the world doesn't. So what do we do with this story? What does the battle for Castle Itter mean for us today, in the 21st century, 80 years after it happened? I think it means several things. First, enemies aren't permanent. Jack Lee and Josef Gangl were enemies. Their countries were at war. They'd been trained to kill each other. But when they met face to face, they recognized something more fundamental than national loyalty. They recognized shared humanity. And they chose to act on that recognition. We need that lesson today. We live in a world of permanent enemies. Political opponents we'll never agree with. Cultural foes we'll never understand. Foreign nations we'll never trust. But Castle Itter says, maybe we're wrong. Maybe the person on the other side isn't irredeemable. Maybe if we actually talked to them, worked with them, we'd find common ground. It's not naive. It's not wishful thinking. It happened. In the middle of the worst war in history, it happened. Second, institutions matter, but individuals matter more. Josef Gangl was part of the Wehrmacht, an institution that participated in horrific crimes. But Gangl himself, as an individual, made different choices. He saw what the SS was doing and said, "No. We can't let institutional guilt erase individual agency. Yes, systems enable evil. Yes, cultures can normalize atrocity. But individuals still have choices, and those choices still matter." Gangl could have stayed quiet, could have let someone else deal with the French prisoners, could have survived the war with clean hands, or at least cleaner hands. But he didn't. He chose to act. And that choice meant something, meant everything to the people in that castle. Third, courage comes in unexpected forms. Jean Borotra was a tennis player, 46 years old, a prisoner for years. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for combat. But when the moment came, when someone needed to run through enemy lines to save everyone, he said, "I'll do it." And he did. Courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just showing up when you're needed, doing the hard thing because no one else will, running when you're asked to run, fighting when you're asked to fight, standing when everyone else sits down. Castle Itter is full of that kind of courage. Not superhuman, not impossible. Just people doing what needed to be done, even when they were scared, even when the odds were bad. That's the kind of courage we need today. Not Hollywood heroics, just people willing to do the right thing when it matters. The battle for Castle Itter doesn't fit our traditional war stories. It's too messy, too complicated, too human, and that's exactly why it's important. Because real life is messy. Real people are complicated. Real moral choices don't come with easy answers. Sometimes the enemy becomes an ally. Sometimes the prisoner becomes a fighter. Sometimes the only way to survive is to trust someone you were taught to hate. And sometimes, just sometimes, people surprise you. They choose honor over survival, justice over safety, human decency over tribal loyalty. Josef Gangl made that choice. So did Jack Lee. So did Jean Borotra and Paul Renaud and all the others in that castle. They weren't perfect people. They'd all made mistakes, done things they regretted, but when it mattered, they got it right. That's the lesson of Castle Itter. Not that war is good, not that enemies are friends, not that everything works out in the end, but that people, even in the worst circumstances, even when everything is falling apart, can still choose to be better, can still find common ground, can still work together, can still create something beautiful out of chaos. For 12 hours on May 5, 1945, in a castle in the Austrian Alps, Americans and Germans fought side by side. It shouldn't have been possible. But it was. And if it was possible then, in the final days of the worst war in human history. Maybe it's possible now. The battle for Castle Itter ended 80 years ago. The soldiers who fought there are gone now. Jack Lee, Jean Borotra, Josef Gangl, all dead. The French prisoners, the American GIs, the Wehrmacht soldiers, time has claimed them all. But the story remains. And as long as we tell it, as long as we remember it, it means something. It means that in our darkest hours, we're capable of more than we think. It means that the lines we draw between us and them aren't as solid as they seem. It means that individual choices matter, that courage matters, that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when no one will ever know, it matters. Josef Gangl could have survived the war. He chose not to. He chose to stand up for what was right, and it cost him everything. But because of his choice, 14 French prisoners went home. American soldiers survived, a medieval castle held against overwhelming odds. And 8 decades later, we're still talking about it, still inspired by it, still learning from it. War is terrible. Let's never forget that. World War II killed tens of millions of people, destroyed entire cities, unleashed horrors we're still trying to understand. But in the wreckage, in the chaos, in the final desperate days, something beautiful happened. People from 3 nations who should have been enemies became brothers in arms. And for 12 hours in a castle in the mountains, they proved that the best parts of humanity can survive even in the worst circumstances. That's the story of Castle Itter, the strangest battle of World War II. and one of the most important stories we can tell. Thank you for staying with me through this incredible story. The battle for Castle Itter is one of those moments in history that almost got forgotten, and I think that would have been a real tragedy. These stories, these complicated, messy, beautiful stories, they need to be told. They need to be remembered. If this video moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that history is more complex and more human than we sometimes want to admit, then please consider leaving a like. It genuinely helps more people discover stories like this. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What did you think about Josef Gangl's choice? About Jack Lee's decision to trust him? About the whole impossible situation? Let me know. I read every comment, and some of the best conversations happened down there. If you want more deep dives into forgotten history, more stories about the moments that didn't make it into the textbooks, hit that subscribe button. I've got a lot more coming. Thanks again for watching.